we've said goodbye to some of our favorite MCU heroes, and some of us reacted by trying to blame our sniffling and crying on allergies. But let's take a look at how the stars themselves cope with their last days on set, and whether or not they think they'll ever return to the MCU. Okay, so Tom Holland's Peter Parker still very much exists in the MCU, at least as long as Sony and Disney keep playing nice with the movie rights. But his character's role in the Infinity Saga was an important one, even if he spent a lot of it as a pile of ash. Marvel has been known to be secretive with its scripts, undoubtedly because of the stars like Tom Holland's The One-Man Spoiler Factory. So it's not surprising Disney decided against giving him the script for Avengers Endgame in its entirety, which is why he walked onto set to film the final scene expecting something very different than what ended up happening. After the dust settled from the final confrontation with Thanos, everyone who's anyone in the MCU showed up for the funeral of Tony Stark. Only Tom Holland thought he was going to be filming a wedding instead. Apparently the crew was so worried about Holland ruining the ending that they told him his character would be attending the nuptials of Tony Stark and Pepper Potts. So could you imagine his surprise when he showed up to Tony's funeral instead? In fact, Holland was so disappointed that he vowed to work on his secret-keeping skills for future films, a vow that came a little too late for some of his Spider-Man Far From Home co-stars. According to Zendaya and Jacob Batalon, who play MJ and Ned respectively, Holland revealed Tony Stark's fate to them before they got to see the film like everyone else. Apparently, although he was blindsided by the wedding funeral mix-up, he did know what would happen to Tony in advance. Even though the final scene wasn't the wedding Holland had hoped for, he and his co-stars still had a blast filming this somber moment. He shared a behind-the-scenes video showing his co-stars laughing and clearly acting in defiance of the no cameras on set rule. Although Avengers Endgame co-director Joe Russo described Robert Downey Jr. as one of the sweetest, warmest human beings in the world, the star apparently didn't want to dwell on the emotional ending of his character. Some hugs and applause from the cast and crew were apparently all he had patience for before moving on. But there was one thing that wasn't quite right the first time they filmed his final scene, and it required him to make a return to the set. His "I am Iron Man" line from the first movie was one Robert Downey Jr. came up with himself.
I am Iron Man.
So in a way, this reshoot was really all his fault. At first, Tony Stark snapped his fingers without saying anything, saving the day at the cost of his own life. But soon after, the Russo brothers decided staying silent instead of making a snarky remark just wasn't really Tony. Thankfully, editor Jeff Ford had the idea of bringing the franchise full circle by having Tony say, "I am Iron Man." Apparently, Downey was reluctant to return to the set and get back in that emotional state, and it took some convincing for him to say the line before it could be included in Endgame. The Russo brothers say they were worried about how Downey would feel about the end of his character arc, but despite some mixed emotions, he apparently signed off on Tony's ending. But other than the one fateful line, Tony didn't have a lot to say after that fateful finger snap. Downey knew that after spending many years showing off his wit, it was time for Tony to stay quiet. It seems like just yesterday, the collective Marvel fandom was losing their minds over Chris Evans' cryptic tweet about the last day of filming. He called it an emotional day, to say the least, and thanks the cast, crew, and audience for the memories. You can practically hear everyone screaming that Captain America was going to perish terribly at some point during Endgame. But as we now know, he survived the film after going back in time and living his life out with his true love, Peggy Carter. It was a sweet moment for those of us watching the movie, and behind the scenes, the cast and crew erupted into applause to celebrate Evans' years working on films for the MCU. It was definitely emotional, and it had a surprisingly huge impact on Chris Evans' mom. Apparently, she just wasn't ready to see her little boy as an old man, because he looked just like his late grandfather after he got done up in hair and makeup. Although this particular scene hit too close to home, she said Evans was glad he took on the role of Steve Rogers, despite the fact that he had been hesitant about it from the beginning.
I can do this all day.
Yeah, I know.
Early on, Evans worried about losing his anonymity by taking on such a huge part, but he definitely made some lifelong friendships, including Thor actor Chris Hemsworth. According to Hemsworth, Marvel wouldn't pair them up for press tours because their brotherly bond often inspired them to goof off rather than stay on track. And while hanging out with his successor Anthony Mackie, Evans accidentally revealed that his character would soon be handing over his shield. Apparently, he missed the memo about which stars were privy to that important information. Although he felt bad for ruining the moment, he and Mackie were able to bond over the script before filming their final scene together in Endgame. Although Avengers Endgame wasn't Scarlett Johansson's last time portraying Natasha Romanoff, it was her character's final chronological scene. Her standalone movie Black Widow will take place after the events of Captain America: Civil War and prior to the beginning of Avengers Infinity War. Johansson felt that Natasha's heroic sacrifice was true to her character, and she looked forward to the prospect of seeing her pass with honor. She claimed filming her final scene with co-star Jeremy Renner was bittersweet. Even the promise of her own standalone film didn't make that day on set any easier to deal with. We all know Natasha ended up sacrificing herself so her best friend Clint Barton could get the Soul Stone and undo the decimation. But originally, it was Clint who was going to take the quickest path to the bottom of the cliff. Ultimately, the writers decided that it was Natasha's sacrifice to make and noted that she made it to save her family and not Cliff's family. Despite feeling like it was the right move, Johansson admitted to being sad about losing Natasha. Endgame tired her out both physically and emotionally, but she said working on the standalone Black Widow movie helped bring her a much-needed sense of closure. Of course, we all mourns the heroes we lost during the Infinity Saga, but let's not forget that we also said goodbye to the Mad Titan.
I am inevitable.
This character had been lurking around the MCU for years, starting back in the Avengers, and while he was a major villain, Josh Brolin is not. At least, not as far as we know. While audiences cheered to see Thanos finally vanquished, the cast and crew had a different reaction behind the scenes. In order to let Brolin know how much he'd be missed, his fellow Avengers Endgame cast members burst out into song. It turns out this particular day on set was also Brolin's 50th birthday, and his friends couldn't resist regaling him with their version of Happy Birthday. While that surely was a touching moment, Brolin had to wait 14 long months before he could share the clip with his fans. Apparently, he really didn't want to join the ranks of Mark Ruffalo and Tom Holland by posting potential spoilers. Even though Brolin celebrated his 5th decade of life while working on Endgame, that doesn't mean his dad can't be proud of him. James Brolin reveals that he couldn't keep up with the plot of the Infinity Saga, but said that he was very proud of his son's role in it regardless. Really? What's so hard to understand about a giant purple alien collecting magic rocks so we can wipe out half of all life at all the universe in order to save it? Now that I say it. Although Brolin ended up getting dusted, he very nearly had to film a totally different scene during the final battle. According to screenwriter Christopher Marcus, Thanos nearly emerged from a portal carrying the head of 2012's Captain America. This would have definitely been surprising, and a lot less feel-good than seeing Cap wields Mjolnir. But in the end, Marcus decided it was a step too far and scraps the plan to have Thanos go back in time and take out past versions of the Avengers. At first, Idris Elba wasn't exactly thrilled to be playing the part of the all-seeing Heimdall in the MCU. In fact, he didn't even know what the MCU was when he was asked about it during an interview. Apparently, he wasn't very familiar with the abbreviation for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which makes sense considering his time on set likely wasn't spent getting that meta about it. Saying that Elba didn't enjoy working on the Thor movies is a bit of an understatement. Let's just say he liked it as much as most fans liked watching Thor: The Dark World. While filming that particular entry in the franchise, he went back for reshoots after wrapping up his work on Mandela: Long Walk to Freedom. Following that up with being strapped in a harness and having to wear that helmet ripped his heart out, according to Elba. But finally, his time in the MCU started to turn around when Taika Waititi stepped in to direct Thor: Ragnarok. Like pretty much everyone else, Elba believes it's the best Thor movie, and it got him excited to portray Heimdall properly for the first time. But But while that's great and all, we all know how this story ends, with Heimdall being destroyed by Thanos during Infinity War. While he enjoyed working on the film more than the first couple of Thor movies, he wasn't ready to leave the MCU just yet. He says he'll miss playing the character he spent 2 films resenting and hopes he'll have a second chance at the role. It might be easy to dismiss this as wishful thinking, but Elba correctly pointed out that Heimdall is pretty much a god, so the idea of him being resurrected or otherwise finding a loophole in the continuity wouldn't be that crazy. It wouldn't even be the craziest thing to happen during the Infinity Saga. Have you made your peace and said goodbye for good to these Marvel characters, or are you hoping one of them will make a triumphant return later on? Share your opinions with us in the comments section below, and then be sure to click subscribe for more videos from Screen Rant. Bye for now.